Hey, this episode of the Adventist Millennial Podcast is sponsored by The Haystack. The Haystack is a voice for young adults in the Seventh-day Adventist Church that produces articles, music reviews, videos, and more. What's the and more? Well, you'll have to go to their website to find out. thehaystack.org. The Haystack. Life, culture, theology. It's finally here. We are back for the much anticipated part 2 of the Conglomerate Mind music / everything else episode, in which the conversation devolves into a huge disagreement about whether we even need church at all. So I hope you guys enjoy. As always, leave me your comments, questions, suggestions, etc. at adventistmillennial@gmail.com or on Facebook or Instagram at SDA Millennial, or come over to our Slack channel, Adventist Millennials. You can find the link for that on my Facebook page, or send me an email and I will send it to you. There's a lot of side conversations going on there that are interesting. So see you and enjoy part 2. Okay, so we've talked about the fact that Christian music today, that's created today, is not really very compelling or interesting from an art perspective. And then you have like the classical composers, which a lot of them were like Bach was writing a lot of like chorales and Christian stuff, and that was like the mainstream music of the day. So can the classical composers be considered Christian, and is that negated? Christian artists, and is that negated by the fact that they were like the rock stars of their day? Mozart was like I mean, and why isn't it that way anymore? Simply because we're in a post-religious society.
I think honestly a big part of it is that they got shoehorned into that position of being accepted as Christian music because there are no lyrics in a lot of the music, or it's listened to without lyrics, whereas today's music is not.
But wasn't a lot of it like actually commissioned for the purpose of from like the church and stuff?
Yeah, a lot of classical music is sacred music.
It is. But yeah, so what I'm saying is that some of it did exist and start as Christian music, but even the stuff that didn't could be shoehorned into a Christian's idea of acceptable music. And since that's the case, it's, I guess, because people don't really listen to classical or Baroque
it's not
music
mainstream
anymore. So the only people who do are the people who are looking for something that's quote unquote acceptable to listen to. And so that's why is that kind of answer the question you were asking?
Yeah, I guess.
Well, what I thought I heard you asking was, why is it that there were these composers that wrote sacred music that were considered mainstream musicians at that point in time, and now there really isn't anybody that breaks out of that.
Yeah, and they were the innovators of music at that time too. Yeah.
Well, I think you kind of were starting to scratch the surface of it when you asked, if it's because we're in a post-Christian era. I think because religion was such an integral part of society at that point, it was pretty rare that you were going to find anybody that was outside of the religious system. So all of the people who were excellent musicians probably were going to be in church, and that was one of the main exhibition arenas for music was church. So that was kind of the best venue at the time. That would be my guess.
The tables have turned.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. And then the only thing that I would add to it is that you didn't have back then the vast number of small independent churches that we have now. You had things like the Catholic Church, which is a huge organization, or the Church of England. Yeah. And so, they commissioned music from like big names because they had the resources to do that. Churches in general most churches do not
Right.
today. I mean,
Yeah, he hit the nail on the head. Like most local churches can't even afford to hire a worship pastor, much less
So now we
commission
So
any
that's
work.
like if Google started commissioning Christian music because the Catholic Church was the corporate structure of that time.
or if Google started their own church.
Oh, perfect. We'll just change the word from Google to God and it will be, A-okay. Okay. So what do you I guess
So I was gonna say, I think what we could do now is just Google the top 100 Christian songs and let's go through one by one and say whether or not it's okay.
Okay. Approved, disapproved. Actually, we don't even need to do that. Just assume that they're all disapproved and then maybe
We'll give you
basis.
the short list of what's acceptable.
Yeah. And now let us all sing. Wait, what was the song that Grandma? Oh, thank you, Lord, for saving my soul. Okay, did you guys have anything else that you wanted to discuss or things that you have thought about in regard to music that we didn't really touch on?
The only thing that I would add that would pertain more specifically to the Adventist Church is because it is such a controversial and divisive topic. I've put some thought into why that might be, and I don't think that I have it figured out, but one of the things that I think definitely plays a part is the fact that it's practically not addressed at all in the Bible. Like there's very little mention about music in general, and then even less about how it was used or why it should be used. However, for Adventists, one of our pioneers and somebody who is held up as an authority within the Adventist Church, and we're not going to go into that, but she has a lot to say, or not a lot, but she has things to say about music and even specific types of music and whether or not certain things are okay or not.
Yeah, that's that could be another hour and a half long conversation.
Yeah, and so without going into what she has to say specifically, I would just I think that's a big part of why it's so polarizing is because there are large groups on both sides of the fence who would go all the way to one side as to follow to the death what Auntie Ellen has to say, and there are those people who dismiss her entirely. And not to say that one side or the other is wrong or right, but since you have that,
but one is wrong or right.
But since you have that divide already, and then bolstered by the fact that there isn't very much
instruction,
in Scripture, then of course people are going to, continue to fall on each side of the fence that they're leaning on.
So, I mean, are we at a stalemate? What is there anything that we could?
Oh, there's a solution. I have the answers. So if people just do what I say.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Good. The chief music dictator of the church.
No, I mean, I kind of do feel like we're at a stalemate, but I also do feel like I have the answer. Not that it's my answer, but I think that it is up to personal conviction. And I think if people truly had the love of Jesus and the Spirit of God and were 100% true to their personal convictions, that would not determine what is okay and not okay universally, but it would remove the controversy.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone would agree that it's up to personal conviction, but your conviction may send you to hell, so.
Yeah, but at least they have concerts in hell.
It's a one giant mosh pit.
So how do you feel about secular music being used in church?
Yeah, well, and that's the whole other thing that we didn't even touch on is what's the role of secular music in the Christian life or whatever, or in the church or anything? Is there
Like I hear the prayer all the time. It's like that's
Disney
from
songs.
Quest from Camelot. That's not a Christian
And
song.
I think that's just a matter of ignorance, right? If they knew that that's what it was, they wouldn't use it.
Because nobody saw Quest for Camelot.
Exactly.
I mean, it has prayer in the name. It has to be godly.
Oh my goodness. What was it? I was at some program. What was the song they were using? I was laughing so hard. It was like, I can't remember what song it was, but it was like a really, really famous song from like a cartoon or something. And everybody was like,
Is that when I was
that what?
in Ukraine with you?
Oh, that's right.
It was Can You Feel the Love Tonight?
They were playing that in church.
It was just some like jazz instrumental cover
Yeah.
of it.
And we were sitting in the back like, don't laugh, don't laugh. That was the best ever. Ignorance is bliss. But yeah, that's a good question about, because a huge attitude, at least in my experience in the more conservative side of the church, is like just secular music as a thing is something that you probably better to not dabble in it at all. But I don't know. That's where all the interesting stuff is happening. As we've already talked about, there's nothing interesting happening in Christian music. I mean, you went through a K-pop phase, right?
Yeah, I listened to K-pop exclusively for 3 years until I figured it out, and now I'm bored with it. But yeah, there's definitely a draw away from Christian music to find something that is interesting or challenging.
Yeah.
And I may understand a little bit of Korean, but certainly not enough to know what a whole song is saying. So definitely the main attraction for me was the music and the theory, because it was different and interesting. And at this point, I've basically had to turn to creating my own interesting Christian music, whether that be on a simple level of just playing hymns with, interesting jazz chords, or changing the melody, or it might even be writing my own songs completely. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of interesting things happening in the Christian music industry as a whole. There are artists making Christian songs, but they're not Christian artists.
So now you're like digging into Celtic music, or what's your next spice?
Right now it's German African fusion.
You asked the question. Did you have anything to say about it?
I
mean, is it okay to play "Can You Feel the Love Tonight" as the elders walk down the middle of the thing and give the opening?
Well, I mean, I guess I have a couple of different thoughts. One of the reasons that I feel like we've talked a lot about like how boring Christian music is and stuff, I think part of our experience is unique in that we're musicians and have been for a long time. So we're looking for something kind of intellectually, musically stimulating to be interesting. So I think our perspective on whether or not we listen to Christian music or not might be different from the average churchgoer.
Right. And I'm actually glad you brought that up, just because I don't want people to think that when we say Christian music is boring, we're not like hating on it and saying that it's terrible. We're just saying it's not intellectually stimulating to a highly trained musician.
And so, I mean, there are still things that are done really well, and they're very simple, but they're executed, with high level of excellence. It just, it's not necessarily something that's interesting to me. As far as whether it's right or wrong to do something in church, I think a lot of it has to do with, what the intent is. If you're a part of a really conservative small church and you have this really rockin' contemporary song that's going to ruffle a bunch of feathers, maybe the relationships that you have with people in church is worth more than trying to make them experience something that they're not going to get a lot out of.
Mhm.
For me, it's sort of like I don't listen to most pop music, anything that's on the radio. A lot of it is because not only am I not interested in it from a musical standpoint, but I'm not really interested in it from a cultural standpoint. There's a lot of values in music today that I don't really agree with. And it's not that I feel like, oh, it's bad music to listen to, or that's, because it's not good morals or that sort of thing, you just shouldn't listen to it. I mean, there's some element of that happening, but it isn't that attractive to me.
Yeah. Why would you have a conversation with somebody about something that you have no interest in?
Exactly. But
So
I don't.
what are we doing?
But I don't have the motivation to like go and preach that to people and say like, clearly none of this is good for you, so you need to just stop listening to it. Because
okay, because I do
that. and for me, it's sort of like, Paul talks a lot about, there's stuff that I do that I feel like because I'm more mature and I understand why people did that in the first place and why people are doing it now, that I feel like I can ignore or I can go and do something. I don't have a conscience issue with that. But I'm not going to go and do that kind of stuff in front of somebody that's going to have a moral crisis over it.
Yeah.
And so I think it's similar in the sense that, like, if you are deciding, like, what's appropriate for church, if you're going to get up and sing a special music, or if you're leading worship in your church, if you're trying to figure out, like, what's appropriate, think about the people that you're trying to serve, and, what you might enjoy might not be what that congregation needs. And at the same time, you also have to be aware enough of what that conversation looks like.
So then we all just have to make our own sects and have our own kinds of music within those. Congregate amongst people.
Maybe.
Better.
I mean, if music is a big enough deal for you to not get anything out of church, unless you're doing, the kind of music you like. I mean, that's why a lot of places, will start their own little church because they don't care for this style doesn't work for me.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, music isn't my struggle, but I do have a really hard time if I'm not getting anything out of the message and what's said in church. So if you're not getting anything there, and additionally you're not getting anything out of the music, like, at that point, why are you there? Well,
I mean, that's a big question that I struggle with. Like, I've been involved in church since I was pretty young, probably 10 or 12, and I've always been more involved in church than have consumed church. And I don't know whether it's because I've found more fulfillment in being involved that I'm bored with church, or if I'm just bored in church because it's boring. It doesn't really matter. The point is, like, for the vast majority of my life, and I'm involved with a church right now that I really like in terms of, like, all the values line up with what they say and do, and I still don't enjoy sitting in church. I don't get a lot out of that. Yeah. I don't get a lot out of, like, listening to the band play and singing along with the worship and listening to the message and stuff. Like, It's just not stimulating enough for me to, like, if I didn't have a family, or, if it was just me and I was like, would I rather go to church or stay home? I'd rather stay home. It's not that I'm looking for something to entertain me. I would just rather be doing something and, helping contribute to the larger whole than passively sitting and, consuming a church service. That just isn't that fulfilling to me.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what you were saying, Emily, about if you're not getting anything out of it, then why are you there? And I think that is the question, is why are you there? Is it just solely to get something out of church, or like Aaron said, to be more involved, or and this is where we transition from talking about music to deep theological discussion.
Oh, good.
So
Part 2.
So that concludes part 1. This is part 2 of 15. And no, but I just very quickly, I was going to say that, yeah, I think your attitude toward music will ultimately be colored by your purpose and motivation for going to church. And I think that that is a problem that a lot of people experience, is their reason for going to church. If you study the Bible and look at the way that a relationship with God works, it's a very personal and individual thing, and many churches are simply consumed and there's no connection or personal aspect to it. If you're just going and listening to music being sung and listening to a sermon being talked to you and then you go home, I can 100% understand why people would not get very much out of that.
And so then what are you supposed to get out of it?
Well, that is part of the church experience, but that shouldn't be all of it. Part of the reason that we come together and commune with one another is to have the interaction and discussion, to learn from each other, to hear different perspectives.
Is church supposed to be boring, though?
No, it's not. And to me, most of the time it's not. But that's because, well, it's partly because I go to like 10 different churches. But the other part is that I'm very involved on a personal level with a lot of different people. And so if I went to church every week, even with other people, but simply sat through a service, it would be boring.
So then
but there's more to it than that.
So what you're saying is you could just have a social group and not have church.
No. I'm saying that the most common denominators in a church service are parts of a puzzle that, when all put together, create a picture of a Christian experience. And if you only have a few puzzle pieces, you don't see the whole picture.
Yeah, okay, but what if the puzzle piece is not part of the puzzle? Like, I mean, if it has no.
So you're saying is a basic church service a necessary puzzle
right.
piece?
Yeah.
Yes, but not everyone has access to a quality church service, or a quality church experience, I should say. Because I don't think that there's always value in just going and attending church if there's not more to it than that. But
but that's what I still don't understand, is what is the more to it. From what I understood out of your explanation was the social aspect, which you could have outside of church. So what is the more to it that we're supposed to be experiencing in church that is missing?
Well, for instance, the aspect of Sabbath school, which a lot of people skip out on because it happens earlier than church, and like I like to sleep in on the weekend, and I don't always make it to Sabbath school. But I think you get a lot out of the discussion that happens during Sabbath school setting, particularly if it's broken up into smaller groups, so that there's a lot more dialogue between individuals. I think that that's part of it. I think that...
Well, generally speaking, I mean, I enjoy Sabbath school more than church because of this discussion aspect, but I would still posit that that's like a Sabbath morning Bible study, which is part of the social experience. I mean, I'm talking about like the church service proper. What are we supposed to be? What is the church service proper supposed to be giving us that we're not receiving?
I don't think we need a church service. I mean, I think it's useful for some things. It's a way to do kind of like mass education, like a lecture in a college, room. So in that sense, it serves some utility. But as far as if there's something sacred about getting together for church, I mean, I don't know that that's like anything other than a cultural thing that we've developed as a tradition over, hundreds of years. I think it's important to have a faith community and to intentionally be engaged in that. But I don't know. I think a large part of my satisfaction personally, and I'm not necessarily speaking for other people of our generation, but I think because it doesn't have as much purpose behind it as I want it to, I don't feel like it's necessary, certainly not in its current form. And now, if you take it away and don't replace it with anything, I think that's a mistake. But until we kind of know what that other whatever the evolution from it is, it would be dumb to kind of take it away, because there are a lot of people who do benefit from it. But I think it's largely traditional.
What about this? This is just a thought that I had that I'm throwing out. What about the purpose of... So for us, we've grown up in the church, you could say, for our entire lives and regularly attending basically all our lives. And it doesn't have a lot of meaning, at least for me at this point. But what about as a corporate demonstration of what we're about for people who want to come and find out, without the added pressure that comes a lot of times with like a small group setting where you actually have to engage, a way to I mean, because I feel like that's what the actual church service is. It's observing us talking about what we believe. So maybe that has value as a way to show that. I don't know.
I feel like it's basically become a more ornate version of a small group. I mean, so there's no reason you couldn't invite some, because I mean, whether you invite somebody to church or they come by themselves, or you invite them to a small group, like it's gonna be dependent on the relationship they have. Whether it's the relationship of I'm curious to see what they're doing in there, or somebody that I personally know invited me, so I'm going because I have that pre-existing relationship. I don't know that it.
Well, like for example, we went to Joel Osteen's church in Houston, and that's a gigantic church, and they have greeters that are very well trained in the customer service aspect of making people feel welcome, but it wasn't a very engaging, interpersonally engaging experience. But it was interesting in the sense that you could just sort of go and observe as a fly on the wall almost. I don't know. Maybe it's not a useful point. It was just a thought that I had. I mean, do you have other thoughts on why? I mean, I think Aaron and I sort of differ from you in our opinion of the church service.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of it comes from the fact that I feel like I get a lot out of a church service. As a general rule, even if it's one that's not super interesting. But I think there is necessity to it. And as far as the general structure, because there is a very uniform structure within Protestant Christianity about how they go about building a church service, I feel like that is very traditional and maybe not necessary. However, I still feel like there's a lot of benefit even to a substandard, so to speak, church service. Even just from the like just to take a couple examples, we could say one spiritual and one, just daily life example. But the Sabbath is part of the purpose and the blessing of the Sabbath is that it's been set apart from the rest of the week, and that it's different from the rest of the days. Just like, if you work from home, many people, like most people who work from home, or if you're a student and you study, you have to have a separate place where you do work, just to be able to be productive. You have to have that environment. And I think that's another one of the benefits of church, at least for me. As someone who, I get something out of going to church regardless, but I kind of like having that special and separate environment to spend some time with God on a weekly basis, rather than I could stay home and invite a couple of friends over and have a Bible discussion, and then listen to a sermon on audioverse or on TV, and have basically the same experience, not experience, but the same things
elements,
happen,
components,
the same elements, but it wouldn't be the same to me, and I feel like I would miss some things.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I could see that. I can see that as a good reason. I just, for me personally, I don't know that it outweighs the agony of a lot of what church service tends to be.
And I guess that's part of why it's hard for me to understand your guys' perspective, because I don't experience a lot of the same agony that you guys do.
Well.
Well, maybe we're just jacked up. We feel like we're too good to sit in church.
Well, no, for me, I think I am a little bit traumatized from my experience in the really fundamentalist part of the church, and the attitude of, well, if you're not getting anything intellectually invigorating from church, that's your problem, because your job isn't to come to church and get something. It's to come and fulfill your duty as part of the rules that God has set up for us. And so as a really rebellious person, I've always had a visceral reaction to that. And maybe it's some vestiges of that, but I think still it is really difficult for me to listen to many of our theologians and pastors without getting extremely bored.
And there are a lot of boring people out there.
Yeah.
Which is a shame, because usually the things that they're preaching on are not boring, but they make them boring.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you guys for being here. If you have any questions, comments, input, send me an email at adventistmillennial@gmail.com. Join our Slack space where we can have these continuing rabbit trail discussions online where we're most comfortable as millennials. Send me an email if you want the link, and message me on Facebook or Instagram at SDA Millennial, and have a good week.